So, yeah, so I'm really excited and grateful to start the new year with you in this way.
Yes, that's true. It's a great way to start. Lots of great things already happening the first few days of January, so this is a good, like, like a power boost.
Yes, yes, I feel that. I feel that. And lots of generative creative energy
Yeah.
flowing. And I'm feeling that too, so I'm excited. Um, how was your break?
Yeah, break was good. I mean, I always reflect on a break. Why don't I allow myself more time like that? Right? It's always like the busyness of the life and of being of service to community and things like that. And I think one of the misunderstandings or um aspects of ignorance is we ignore that for ourselves, right? We forget like sometimes taking that break is a way of servicing the community on many levels by self-care, by being an inspiration of self-care, by um, implying, that others can sort of pay it forward in the same way by being the model of that. And, it's like we can pause. And so when I talk to people that are like, oh, I'm so busy, I don't have time to take off. And it's like, well, if you don't make the time to take off, illness will make the time for you to take off.
That, yes.
And then that's not the best use of the time off because rather than just enjoying the moment of taking a walk in the woods or, meditating or playing with your dog or making some lovely meal for friends, you're bedridden and stuck with symptoms and aches and pains and mind is being afflicted and things like that. And then it's like, well, what would you rather be doing? And in every moment to moment, it's like the breath. The breath is there every moment to moment in our world, in our reality. We take advantage of it because it's something we don't really have to think about, right? I mean, those of us that are like, oh, we go to yoga and we learn breathing practices, or we do Tibetan practices, or we do Chinese practices, or we do, shamanic practices that we use the breath, and of course that requires an awareness. Um, which is great. And then when we're not like in the on phase of like, oh, I'm going to sit and meditate, so I'm going to focus on my breathing right now, we don't think about the breath so much. And then
Mhm.
as we practice with the breath and we practice moment to moment as much as possible, we can watch how the breath um, dictates and or is influenced by what the mind is doing.
Mhm.
And so if we're caught up in mind and thought and busyness and don't have time, then the breath will naturally get to a shallow place. And then when we are experiencing anxiety and if we relearn the reprogramming of our relationship to ourselves, when we know, like through our inner work, oh, I'm anxious. Oh, my breath must be off. So therefore, if I redirect my awareness to my breath, I can help shift some of this. Right. And it's not all of it because it's never just one thing that's going to be the magic bullet, the magic pill. And in the West, we assume that there's that one thing that's going to be the quick fix for everything, you know. And just like an athlete doesn't get that gold medal just by waking up in the morning and going and just presenting him or herself, um, we understand that the process in which it takes for them to get there is a more strenuous process. And people are like, no, I just want to get the gold medal.
That's
And
right.
and it's not like, oh, well, what? I have to get up early 6 days a week and modify my diet and modify my physical routine and regimen and things like that and do this every day for like a year, 2 years, 10 years before I can get that. No, no, never mind. What's the easiest way there? And there is no easy way. Because if it was, everybody would be doing it.
That's exactly right. I think about everyone's doing it. And, I think that there are so many things. I think when you talk about um the quick fix, and even as I think about like the ways that um yoga and other indigenous and Eastern traditions, spiritual traditions have been commodified in the West and broken down. It uh it takes away from the conscious awareness of what's happening, right? Like to commodify to extract or to exploit, um, takes away the resource without the conscious awareness. And I feel like that urgency, that desire to have a quick fix. We talk about the like a magic pill. In the West, we end up taking multiple magic pills. And then the that the magic pills counteract the other magic pills. So we take another magic pill for the counter indication of the other magic pill. And the slowing down to come into conscious awareness of what's here at the root, I
Hmm.
feel like is um, one of um, one of the things that I'd love to talk with you about. And it also, I think it really resonates with my healing experience, my journey, ongoing, present, right now. And I think about, you know, when we started working together,
Hmm.
not only and I know that I wasn't looking for a quick fix. I think that I knew, right? I had been um searching, like doing tons of research, trying to find um a holistic approach to my health. I knew that, but I also knew, and it was interesting because I was aware of the somatic connections, right? The
Hmm.
psychosomatic connections between my mental and physical health, right? That they were connected. And yet I still had a Western diagnostician's understanding. I had a WebMD understanding. I had a, which comes from that anxiety, like there's something wrong, go to WebMD, type in
Hmm.
the symptom. They'll tell you exactly what that symptom might be,
Yeah.
completely out of a systemic context.
Yeah.
I think that, coming to you um, was um, was first of all, it was just like spiritually divine. Like because we had been in the same city all of these years and I had been searching and doing research for functional medicine doctors, naturopaths. I consistently went to acupuncture. I practiced hot yoga for a long time. And then in the pandemic, I started practicing yin yoga and restorative yoga. And I had um, multiple ways that I was working with my health and wellness. And at the same time, I was still relating to, and you mentioned relationship, how we um, relating to my health and relating to the systems, looking for um, magic pills, I think, even more so than quick fixes,
Hmm.
magic pills. I was also looking for help from my mother. And I don't think that's separate. I think it is very connected to my experience in a Black woman's body,
Hmm.
uh, who has had, who is, and also eldest child, oldest daughter, girl child, gendered as and socialized as the caretaker, caregiver.
Hmm.
And so in my, uh, what I would say, there are some like codependent kind of control orientations toward trying to fix, quick fix,
Hmm.
magic pill my family so that I could feel secure and know that they were well. I prioritized their health, my parents' health, as my child's health, and my health, right, out of fear. And so I think that that was a lot of, I was bringing a whole history to you,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? I wasn't just bringing these symptoms, right? Or these things with my mental health, my physical. I wanted to lose weight. I had a baby, but I had not lost the baby weight and it had been, 3 years. Um, I had postpartum trauma, depression. Like I had been diagnosed with all these things,
Hmm.
OCD,
Hmm.
anxiety, depression. Um, I witnessed another Black mother who was
Hmm.
in my relational orbit. I knew that she had died in childbirth. And so her daughter is 2 months younger than my daughter, and that's my husband's best friend's daughter, right? Our
Mhm.
best man in our wedding. And these two girls have grown up together. And 2 months, I'm holding my little baby, and I know that she died in the hospital while giving birth. And some of her last words were, "They're not listening to me.
Mhm.
There's something wrong here. Um, I think they care more about getting this baby out than me being alive."
Mhm.
And so I say that I brought all this to you, and I feel like the way in which I came to you right before I got COVID, right? I brought you all these symptoms. But I think I want to pause here and just say that there's a way in which I so value the way that you and Ayurveda look at the systemic whole, look at the
Mhm.
relationship to, look at the interconnectedness, the interdependent possibilities for health. So I just want to pause there. I know I said a lot.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
I pause. I was like, maybe I'm gonna go light some incense and then bring a little bit of spirit and peace in this space. And I'm just curious what might emerge. So I'm gonna grab some incense. I'll
Yeah.
just
Okay.
I'll be right back.
Okay.
And some sage. Yeah. Okay. Usually have my Palo Santo right here. So here we go. And I'll just add, I feel like this is also us bringing in our context to our relationship and how we work together. And one of the, I think one of the things that I was most excited about when I went to your website was you telling your story
Mm.
and you bringing the wholeness of you. Like I felt you. There was a felt sense of your full humanness. And I hadn't even met you yet. Um, but there was an ease in my nervous system,
Mm.
um, and a connection to the humanity that you expressed. To, I mean, like deeply knowledgeable. You know, usually you go to doctors' websites and you check all their credentials and you want to know, like, do they have these X ratings? And what stood out for me was, wow, this man has tons of credentials in multiple countries around the world globally. And also, um, what a powerful human,
Mm.
what a connected human. Um, I believe this human might see me.
Well, thank you. Yeah. As a side note to that, some of my friends have pointed out to me, I said, that's too personal. It's too long. You don't want to put that all out there. And, I've contemplated like, oh, do I reduce it? Do I just remove it? Because I've had the same kind of feedback from many of the patients that have come in since I wrote that they've come in mostly because they saw that and they could relate to that and they felt like they can plant in. And I think on some level, you know, I mean, I think as I progress through time and space, I refine a certain level of what makes it clear to me of who do I want to work with within Ayurveda. Ayurveda already has written. I feel like Ayurveda has written about everything that it had such an amazing foresight with the inherent knowledge that it possessed to understand, what the future was going to mold into based on just understanding the science of Ayurveda inherently. There's an inherent understanding to the logic that's there, and it's built in, and it's been there for thousands of years cultivated. And so it's understanding like what kind of person, what kind of patients do you want to work with, and what kind of patients do you not want to work with? And, for me, it's like I definitely want, and it affirms my sort of New Year's intention, quality over quantity.
Hmm.
And I want to keep attracting that patient that is in that place that's ready for a certain level of work and process. Because coming here, it's not going to be very easy peasy. I mean, if you come in and you say, I've been generally healthy for the past, however many years of life, and only in the past 6 to 8 months, maybe up to a year, I've had some symptoms develop. And, they're not like chronic or intense or urgent. Then it's like, this is very easy to cure. Very fine. Well, then we get past the 8 to 12 months window, and 2 years, 8 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 40 years. And then it's not easy to cure. Then most likely it will not be curable. It would just be in a state of just manageable.
Hmm.
Um, and so, there's a criteria in Ayurveda when we think about, curability and curability. And there are four main terms that are the umbrella. It's Sukhasadhya, Kricha, Yapya, and Asadhya. And so Sukhasadhya means like, very easily cured, you know, just correcting diet and lifestyle enough, most most of the time is enough to like change the trajectory of that person's direction of ill health. Very easy. That's not that common. Then Kricha is more like, all right, it's curable, but not that easy. Requires some work and time and intensity of like certain treatments and things like that. Yapya is incurable, but we can manage it and sustain the longevity at peace in a way that's more as close to homeostasis without being able to completely cure it, because some things cannot be cured, and we understand that in Ayurveda. And then incurable, which is hasadya, which means if a person's in incurable state, stage 4, and you're in the last 2 months of cancer, that is not. But because death is part of life, we understand that in Ayurveda, and we say, oh, how can we help this person ease into the next reality of whatever that might be, to nothingness, to everythingness, to heaven, to wherever their consciousness as an individual journey goes. And so, what kind of person comes in, we look at from so many angles as an Ayurvedic doctor, there are so many pieces that we're pulling together so that we can get an understanding of this person's reality, not just like, oh, I'm coming in with hyperacidity. Like it's like, yeah, what brought you to this moment of hyperacidity? In Ayurveda, we don't rely on at least traditional Ayurveda. New Age Ayurveda is a little bit different, and that's a different topic. But traditional Ayurveda, we don't rely on Western medical diagnoses. We take whatever term that they're using, from cancer to pancreatitis to diverticulitis or any of these things. We take that and go, okay, this one little piece of information, we'll put that right here, because we have a whole different framework of how we understand the person, so we can refine and get more to the root. And I read it's called mula. So we get to the mulastan, the root foundation of what's this person coming in with and how did they get here. And it's a very, I like to say, OCD system, because we look at so many different little details that people don't normally think about. And it's those little details that over time accumulate to a momentum. So we get focused on, ah, here's X marks the spot. I have this thing and it's really screaming for my attention. But I neglected, or I forgot, or I got used to, 6 months ago or 10 months ago or 4 years ago, this little thing that was just there. And in the moment I was like, and I just keep going. And we can come to present state of, you know, before you get a cold, there's already a preliminary prodromal sort of symptomatological presentation of like the cold's coming. And it could start with just like, oh, I have a little tickle in my ear, and you're just like, oh, I'm just gonna scratch it. Or my nose feels a little dry. That's fine. I'll just drink some water, which doesn't really help in most cases. Or, oh, my throat feels like a little scratchy, you know, or, oh, I feel a little fatigued this morning. And not talking about like overall chronic fatigue syndrome kind of thing, like, oh, I feel a little bit more tired the past couple of days. Like, there's so many little signs in each individual person that will indicate, like, and then a week later you have a cold and you're like, oh my God, I have a cold. And it's like if I caught the dryness, if I caught the tickle, if I caught the scratchiness, if I caught that slightly, you know, low energy, then I probably could have curtailed developing the cold. And
Hmm.
then it's like, well, how did I get to that place? Well, let's go back a little step further. I was, staying up late and overeating and mixing in appropriate foods and eating at the wrong times or skipping meals or exercising when I should be having a meal because I was hungry, but I didn't have time to eat, but I had time for like, we go back further to understanding like that was more like the cause. And
I'm smiling from like a deep knowing and self.
yeah,
My inner self is like, oh, yes, are you talking to me? Yes.
yeah. I mean, this is the interesting thing. And Ayurveda has such a framework and has been established for thousands of years to know to look for certain patterns.
Mhm,
Uh, my mentor and my teacher and colleague, we were having a talk like some months ago, and we were talking about osteoporosis, osteopenia, and things like that.
mhm,
And and it was like, okay, understanding digestion and things like this. Um, and he was very clear, and he referenced like the classical texts of Ayurveda, and he said, if a person before the age of 40 had tendency, and it's a very strong tendency, not just like once in a blue, of staying up late. And Ayurveda is like staying up late is staying up past 10 o'clock.
mhm,
That's almost like a hard rule. Like 10 o'clock is the time you should be asleep. So if a person has had that tendency of staying up late, um, and all these things, and incompatible foods, mixing like cheeses with breads and cheeses with sauces and cheeses with meat and all these kind of things, or dairy with fish and stuff like that. Um, they are, he's like, not they might or could, they will. He's very emphatic and he's extremely knowledgeable, have some osteoporosis, osteopenia issues. So
mhm,
persons had this momentum up until age 40. After that, then enough seeds have been planted to give birth to this in their persons in their 60s or 70s and things like that. And it's like, wow, it's like what seeds are we planting over time? And
yes,
Ayurveda gives a lot of credence to understanding the strength of digestion, um, because it plays a very vital role in like how things are processed and metabolized. And it's on a physiological level, it's on a psychological level, all of this is why, Western medicine has been kind of catching up a little bit and like about 8 to 10 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, made this, you know, gut brain connection. I read
mhm,
it's like, of course, we already knew this. And because there is a direct correlation between what's happening in the digestive system and what's happening in the mind. And, I recently had a patient, he's 27, with bleeding hemorrhoids and just generally bleeding in his stools and type of like ulcerative colitis kind of thing. And he also suffers from extreme anxiety.
mhm,
And so it's like, well, of course, if you have a boat that has a hole in it and the water is causing the boat to sink, you're going to get frenetic and stressed, right? But from the Western standpoint, they give him an anti-anxiety medicine, which is Lexapro for him. And his digestive systems continue to get worse. And so it's like, well, we'll give you some sort of blocker or something that's going to support the digestive system with Western medicine. Um, and that usually either band-aids it, quiets it, or pacifies it, doesn't cure it, doesn't resolve it. And then we know in Ayurveda, well, that thwarting is going to be redirected to a different pathway.
mhm,
And so now we're like, where is it going now? And then what is it reinforcing, which would be this perpetual anxiety piece. And so from the standpoint, we had started the work of let's correct the digestive system, because in his case especially, that was the main cause of the anxiety. And then there was, and this started, uh, when he was young. He was, I think, around 7, so like first or second grade, that he had, um, some digestive issues after, he had, he was throwing tantrums not to go to school. He was just anxious and angry because, if you're not hurt or anxiety, you get to become angry, and then you act out angrily. So one of the emotions are going to go to extreme and then perpetuate that. And his mom um, didn't know how to handle that, so she took him to a psychiatrist and put him on medicine at that age. And
So I
then,
want to pause you for a second because there's something really powerful there about the thwarted energy. Um, right? And what happens when that energy doesn't get expressed, doesn't get released in the pathway or the pattern that it normally takes. Because I feel like that's it's really important to pause there and kind of break that down.
mm,
I think especially within the context. So within my work, from a somatic and I'd say structural awareness of the ways in which certain bodies are not allowed, are conditioned to um, uh, retain, hold in the energetic expression of emotion. So if
mhm,
you're in a woman's body, if
mhm,
you're in a woman of color's body, a Black woman's body, when you are consistently taught not to express, or when you're not even taught explicitly, but you
mhm,
have learned from a very early age, it is not safe. Just like you
yeah,
said, your patient, right? Like maybe the parents said, it's not safe. We're going to put you on something. We're going to give you something to redirect
yeah,
or to pacify. That energy has to go somewhere. So I just want to pause because I want
yeah,
to like illuminate that as something that's very powerful. And I think as we talk about that gut brain relationship that Ayurveda has always known about, right? Like
yeah,
yeah, I just want to kind of drop in there with you.
yeah. No, I mean, it's very true. And so when we think about this, we think about, you know, Ayurveda's holistic standpoint in understanding the smallest little things. And so um there's a there's an understanding that there's what's called the Adharanya Vegas, which are the 13 urges not to be suppressed. And then there's the Dharanya Vegas, which are the urges that should be suppressed. And it's very interesting to think, well, what shouldn't be suppressed and what should be suppressed and things like that. And we'll just go to like the 13, um, which should not be suppressed. And so the general list is like belching, flatulence, defecation, urination, sneezing, thirst, um, hunger, sleeping, coughing, breathing, yawning, tears, vomiting, and even like ejaculation or any kind of like function in that direction. So it's like, oh, these are the things that you should not suppress, right? And in Ayurveda, we understand that in the suppression of these urges, you cause a redirection of the energy, which is not just like, oh, we're speaking metaphysically about energy. Energy is not just metaphysical, it is a physiological thing, it is a physics thing, right? Because in physics, you talk about energy, right? And law of thermodynamics and all these things. And even Einstein's theory of relativity, like energy is not just like the energy of the breath and prana and chi. It's much more than that. And
Mhm,
so the energy of these particular urges has a geography, right?
mhm,
Belching comes from a certain region in the body. Sneezing comes, the urge to eat comes from a certain region in the body. Coughing, pooping, you know, vomiting. Like when we think about it logically, and Ayurveda it's called yukti, using logic to really understand, like, if I have to poop and I hold that urge to poop because, oh, I have to finish what I'm doing, or I have to, I can't make it, I have no time. I just got to wait a little bit longer, or I'm a teacher and I have to hold this until the next break, which gives me like 4 minutes before class and stuff like that. And then, well, at first you might just go, oh, I can hold it for like 5 minutes. And then you create a pattern of like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and you're like, oh, I feel a little crampy or a little bloated, or, and then like that will progress to like, I'm getting migraines. My my joints are kind of hurting. I'm getting more anxious, or I'm getting more depressed. And you don't think about it. You don't make the connection to, um, oh, it's because I'm withholding a natural urge, because this is the body's natural expression, right?
Mhm.
So if you're, you know, we think about, it happens to boys and girls, or and then they become men and women. Stop crying. Don't cry,
Mhm.
right? So it's not even just like, oh, I'm boo-hooing, crying. It's also like, oh, expressing an emotion. We could say like, oh, that's a crying out for some version of speaking. We know technically crying means like tears being produced from the eyes and released. So don't do it. Don't speak. Don't express your emotions.
Yeah.
You know, toughen up. You know,
Mhm.
if it's a little boy, don't be a sissy,
Mhm.
right? Or any of these things. And
Never
then if,
let them see you cry.
huh?
Never. The way, so when you said that if you're a boy, you're a sissy. Um,
Yeah,
and what I heard also, what I received was never let them see you cry.
yeah. Never let them see you cry. Yeah,
That was
and
from a man, right? A man telling me what he was told as a boy, but then, right? So you don't let them see you cry.
yeah,
Don't let
yeah.
anyone see you cry, me including.
Well, yeah, and that's very interesting because that can go two ways. It could be a complete suppression of the tear necessity, or it could be just don't let anyone see it, but you can go in your own room, be in your own private space and cry. And
Was
um,
shameful.
yeah, and
Mhm.
then it's like, oh, okay, so it gets interpreted by different. And so, anyways, so we understand any suppression of these urges. If I have to pee, if I have to, if you're like, because sometimes some people they like they sneeze in a really particular way and they're just like holding it, or they try not to burp,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And it's like, um, where does that go? It creates a certain pressure in that part of the body, right? And then that will accumulate over time, especially if you tend to do that often, right? And I know like in women, with women, like they're like, oh, when we go on our dates and stuff like that, we don't want to express flatulence because it's not appropriate. That's what you learn, and it's like women don't do those kind of things, etc. And but then over time, when they have like menstrual dysregulation or amenorrhea or dysuria or dysmenorrhea or any of these things that create like little subtle complications that we're like, where is this coming from? Right.
Yes.
And this could be like another topic in and of itself, but just to simply say, when a woman's put on birth control, any of the versions of the birth control, for whatever reason, whether it's hormone management or it's just to prevent pregnancy and things like that, there's a physics here, right? There's a
Mhm.
physics, which is like, if the body of a woman is naturally inclined to releasing, as part of like detoxification process and all these things, and we sort of plug it up,
Mhm.
it goes in a different direction because an energy by nature is going this way. It's meant to go downward, right? Towards gravity, by gravity. And now we're opposing gravity. When you go against the natural flow of something, right? Doing that will create a certain pressure within the ecosystem of that environment and then will thwart and become something else, right?
Mhm.
And so it's only over time.
I want to
So
pause here too, because you,
yeah,
you drop these pearls, and I'm like,
yeah,
because and I think this is also the one of the incredible things about Ayurveda as well is, as you talked about, um, the the environment of the thwarting, right?
Uh-huh.
A couple of things happened for me. One, I went to like, what are the social conditions? Like, what are the ways in which we're conditioned, within, and I want to say specifically within like a Western capitalist extractive and
Mm-hmm.
exploitative culture, a culture that and systems that extract resources from the earth, and thwart natural earth system movement, and
Mm-hmm.
also the social conditioning, like we talked about, that is either gendered or related to a toxic masculine understanding of emotional and energetic expression, or I think also what happens to women's bodies, like don't be hysterical, or to
Mm-hmm.
your, even about reproduction. Well, there's that actually is a larger context in politically and socially in a lot of ways, the
Yeah.
way it's controlled. And I think that there's something about um, going against the natural flow, and what is created through these social systems, these social constructs, that
Mm-hmm.
causes the thwarting of a natural flow, and then unintended outcomes, and are show up in the body and in the earth. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so the thing that I guess what I want to kind of illuminate and even like dig in deeper with around that and the gut and
Yeah.
digest, is I think one of the things that's coming up for me are the ways in which we forget to trust what is natural and organic, right? Because of that conditioning. Right, even the I don't see climate change, or it says it is, I do see it, right? I do see that things are shifting in the environment.
Mm-hmm.
Um it's not present for me right now until the smoke comes, until the fires come and we can't breathe, we can't see, right?
Yeah.
And so I think what I want to, and smoke that's not supposed to be here, not supposed to be here,
Yeah.
um, in the Northeast, coming from Canadian fires. And
Yeah.
now I see this like hyper prevalence of, and I'm making my own connections, but I have to do this,
Yeah.
like hyper prevalence of reoccurring respiratory, upper respiratory infections this fall. I don't know if this is a real thing, but I have been sitting with this since I have been getting sick since August, and we could talk about that too. But I know that there are things that I have also done, right? When you ask me like
Yeah.
systemic things for me, um, but when a brilliant friend of mine and coach, wellness coach, Kaylin Johnson, talks about unexplainable unwellness. And to your point, it's not unexplainable. And that's what she's talking about as well, as the systems that come together.
Yeah.
And so what I guess what I'm connecting is both the unexplained or unintended outcomes of the thwarting, that is it is intentional, right? It is a systemic pattern. It didn't happen by
Yeah.
accident in the within the earth and in our bodies. And also when we forget to trust ourselves. So I might think, oh, I can't tell anyone that I think there's a connection between the smoke that turned the sky orange and my throat burning this summer, and reoccurring ear infections
Yeah.
in my community, like not just in my family, but in
Yeah.
everyone I talk to in the Northeast has had repeated illness throughout the fall that keeps coming back,
Yeah.
like sick with bronchitis, sick with sinusitis, ear infections over and over and over and over again, walking pneumonia over it because it's not
Yeah.
leaving. So I just want to pause there because I'm like, oh, am I conspiracy theorist, or can I? And I'm going to use this metaphor, right? Because I think it's still applied. Can I trust my gut?
Yeah. 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 And I have an interesting couple quotes from Charaka, which is the oldest of the Ayurvedic tradition in Materia Medica. And so we'll tie into that. But no, I mean, if we're gonna look at an example of when the Canadian smoke affected us, as an Ayurvedic physician, I was already thinking as the smoke was happening, you know, what's going to be awaiting us later down the pipeline from this, right? Because I was already thinking in terms of air contamination, water contamination, soil contamination, you know, and how is the sediment from what was in the atmosphere landing in the soil, and how is it landing in water that's going to change the acidity levels, because smoke is to some degree because it's carbon and all these other things like nitrogen and hydrogen combusting, causing this alchemical reaction and infusing into the water, into the soil that we'll be getting crops from, right?
Yeah.
Essentially. And we're breathing it in. And so how is it landing in the body? And this is where Ayurveda comes in and says, how is the body digesting this experience? Right? Because it's not just physical, it's also like, how's the mind dealing with like, the house is on fire, which is the earth, and say Philadelphia, New York City, and New Jersey from these smoke, and people are getting anxious and getting more mentally afflicted by these things. And and Ayurveda, there's a fundamental term called Siddhanta, which is karna karya, which is like cause and effect. There is always a cause and effect. Once we
Mm.
understand the cause, we can understand the multiples of the effects. And if there is an effect, we know there was a cause. It cannot be mutually exclusive. And so I was already thinking, and in terms of how that applies to Ayurveda within the context of Ayurveda, it's understanding, okay, what is happening on a physiological level and mental level. So we have doshas, which are like vata, pitta, and kapha, and manasika doshas, which are, rajas and tamas, which are the most important pieces that when they're in an agitated state, create more of the mental instability in one direction or the other, or in multiple directions, and all these things. And
Could you
so,
pause for a second and maybe for folks who may not know the dosha, I know that's a whole topic.
yeah, yeah,
I was like, I'll just put a pause and then
yeah,
we can come back just to remind us that we can have a conversation on the doshas.
doshas, and yeah,
Then we
yeah.
can, so keep going. I don't want to interrupt
So
this.
for simplicity, like we'll think of like Greek medicine talking about the humors, bile, phlegm, etc., and wind and stuff like that. And in Ayurveda, we're looking at physiological processes that are governed by certain qualities and principles. And so when we think about doshas, that's what we're thinking of. Vata, Pitta, and Kapha are basic umbrella terms that are really overseeing like a field of what's in this field. We have poppies, we have, marigolds, we have wheat, and so like Vata Pitta and Kapha is like an umbrella term describing certain physiological experiences, certain qualities in our world, in our dimensions, in our universe. So yeah, and it gets very complicated. And then there's a mental understanding of the similar thing that we're describing as far as like Rogers and Thomas and what are the qualities. So we're more focused on qualities because these qualities indicate something. And so understanding like what are these qualities affected by, and how does that translate into like what the body's doing? And so when we come to doshas, what is the body's capacity to process whatever is happening? That's dependent on what's called Agni, which is like a main fundamental digestive process in digesting experiences, mental and physical, because it's always mental and experience and physical. It's an experience. And so how is this information being digested or not digested or indigested or incompletely digested, or inappropriately digested, and so we look at all this. And so when people are like running, still going running, wearing masks during this really incredible smoke, and they're like, oh, I need to do my regimen. I'm like, no, like that is not proper use of logic. That is not good yukti. That is not good buddhi or intelligence. Because if it is smoke outside, you should not be running in the smoke even with a mask, you know, because these things have, just because you're putting a mask on does not mean your skin is not absorbing or breathing it in. I mean, skin is a breathing entity. It's the first line of immunity, right?
Yes.
So something that fundamental, logic would say, oh, I should avoid being outside as much as possible during this time and try to properly allow my home, physical and actual structural, like external home, to be able to breathe in a way that will sustain me. Because right now, outside is not sustainable.
But can I pause you here? Because there's something powerful even about that
Yeah.
in the um in the energetic, and I think as you described it, right, like in the psycho-emotional indigestion, or the what definitely resonates to me as a trauma response, like the hypervigilance of I must keep going.
Yeah.
Right? Like I must keep going regardless of these circumstances, or I am disconnected from the reality or the present moment of this experience, and I have to maintain this routine,
Mhm.
right, to maintain reality or normalcy within what is abnormal is a part of a trauma response. Something happened, as you mentioned, cause and effect.
Yeah.
Something happened. I'm going to override and ignore it and keep going.
Yeah. And there is a very interesting line and difference between, I had the strength to go on and continue to endure certain things. And that's using proper internal and thinking processes and intelligence to determine when do I do that and when do I not do that. And when we have the side of our choice that's more anchored in an anxiety state, then you're not doing it from a clear state. And then choices there should not be trusted, right? And so you're going to make things as a trauma response, like, oh, I have to keep going because if you are forcing yourself to slow down to the present moment and go, oh my God, AQI, air quality index, is 490, 502 when we should not be more than 50, you know, oh my goodness, like what's happening to the state of the world, right? And
Mhm.
people are going to have more of a hypervigilant response because we entered into a pandemic, and most of us that, were under the age of like 60, maybe 70, have not experienced a world pandemic before. And so it's information coming in. How are we digesting this? Right? Because digestion happens on a physical level and also on a mental level. And so when we have our filters clean in our mind, we can take information in properly and understand what to look at, what not to look at. That's why a lot of people get anesthetized by social media and distracted by social media and this chaotic, there's this whole chaotic situation that creates confusion. And if you're not able to see past the confusion, then you don't know what to trust, and then you're getting into like, woe is me, what's happening in the world. And that's because the mental faculty of digestion has been compromised,
Yes.
right? And so similarly, when a person's physical digestion is compromised, when normally a person can eat wheat or gluten or things like that, even if it's not the highest quality of wheat or gluten in US processing versus European processing, if digestion's not proper, of course there's going to be complications. So in Ayurveda, we're like, let's try to get to the root cause of supporting the body so it can digest some of these experiences. And yes, of course, over long term, people eating inappropriate foods, whether it's mental and or physical, will cause indigestion for people. Of course, this is the logic of cause and effect, that if you're doing too much of this thing and you don't have the balance of like eating properly, sleeping properly, exercising properly, cleansing properly, which is pivotal in like our health more today than ever in our entire existence as humanity. That, Ayurvedic processes like panchakarma and things like that for seasonal cleansing is not even just like an idea that's important, it's mandated
Yes.
because the doshas, which are physiological processes, are now overwhelmed by the current state of conventional, you know, times, and we're not digesting anymore because now we're getting things that are clogging up in the channels and the arteries and the veins and the liver and the kidneys and all these systems. And then we're wondering why the smallest little thing sets us off. Why are we not digesting? And this is the thing. What are we not digesting in our mind when we're watching constant CNN first thing in the morning and CNN before bed. Like, who does this? Is not proper. Yes,
Well,
we should
correct.
be,
And I want to, but I have to call myself out. I
yeah,
don't do this anymore. I'm gonna be clear.
yeah, yeah.
But also I have other patterns. I think this is important too, right? Like I think I told you this that, I think from uh yeah, I think from December, no, basically from the time of the Muslim ban, when Trump was elected, I stopped. Well, when he got elected, I stopped watching the TV
Oh,
altogether. I
yeah.
felt like it was a
Mm-hmm.
betrayal, right? And I was like, I can't take this in anymore. I can't take this in. And then when the Muslim ban happened that night, I remember when people were
Mm-hmm.
protesting and organizing at the airports.
Yeah,
Uh, I remember that was a Friday night, and I think it was a Friday night. I can't remember what month it was, but it was not long into his administration. So maybe
mm-hmm.
it was like early 17.
Mm-hmm.
From that day until like November 4th, 2020, I watched the news. I won't say which network,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
you
yeah,
mentioned it already. Uh, I was addicted. The level of consumption, to your point, of that
yeah,
information from a very hyper vigilant place of I must know what's happening. I have to be, there's got to be a way that this can change. And if I and the belief that I can control it, because I felt so out of control, right? And there's so many of our bodies, to your point, that feel so out of control. And so
yeah,
there's belief, if I consume more information, right? Then if I'm constantly there waiting, I'm waiting for something to happen. And there was so much, they were dumping so much at us, and that breaking
yeah,
news urgency that, was created to trigger that specific kind of
yeah,
out of control anxiety. Um,
yes.
that that created and heightened this level of and I think as you mentioned it, right, like all doshas were overwhelmed, if that's like right, like that's how if I can understand it, and please correct me. um
But more like the mental aspect, which is the mental doshas, which is called Manasika dosha, which is like Rajas and Tamas, which is like understanding like instability and chaos to like inertia and unclearness, right?
yes,
And because the physical doshas of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha can be affected by the mental component, of course, because the body-mind connection. Um, but dosha specifically in the body would relate to especially like improper eating. So if you're stressed, you're going to eat a lot. You know what happened during COVID? People were smoking more pot and increasing more alcohol,
oh, I was
anxiety
high
increased.
for a year and a half.
Hmm?
I was
Huh?
high for a year and a half
Oh,
during
yeah.
COVID.
And so doing these substances, these
With
externalized,
marijuana, I want to be clear with what substances, with
yeah,
most
yeah, yeah.
CBD, but there
Yeah,
was
doing
other
these substances,
THC in
whether
there.
drinking or smoking or any of these things, you know, there can be a time and place within the world of being human and experiencing it and having it like a short-lived pleasure. But when it's an indulgence on a regular basis, it does affect the clarity of the senses. It's by design supposed to do
Yeah,
those things. And so when a person's indulging excessively, which is what happened during COVID, because a lot of data shows that during this period of time, people are increasing their consumption of marijuana and increasing their consumption of alcohol. People were like losing track of purpose and losing understanding of like when to wake up, when to sleep, all these things. And
yeah,
when you're indulging in these like external stimuli, then of course it's going to perpetuate that. And then because they are addictive by nature, anything that causes a repeated need for its injection into your body becomes addictive. People would say like marijuana is not addicting. Of course it is. Eating cookies after a period of time, if you get into eating cookies every single day, it becomes addictive. Like there are food disorders, there are drug disorders, there are sex disorders, there are gambling disorders. Of course, anything could be an addiction when you're depending on an external source. And so that externalized need that's been projected comes from an inner state of where's my clarity anymore.
yes,
And I cannot be clear if I'm inundating myself with things that are going to be overwhelming the senses over and over and over and over and over and over again. And so we have to understand, like, how do we take pause from this so that we can allow the body to digest, so that when an untruth presents itself, we can have more clarity and go, no, this is not true, you know. And it's not coming from a place of denial. It comes from a place of pure clarity, from an inner state of awareness that is cultivated. And we go back to the beginning point where we started talking about, a lot of people want the gold medal without doing the work. Coming to a clearer state is not very easy and quick for some people. Some of it depends on karma, some of it depends on the karmic contributions of childhood development and the home environment and immediate ecosystem of whatever town, city, neighborhood, etc., that it has allowed you to be more in a place where you're like relaxed. And because when you're not relaxed, you can't make clear decisions, right? And so when we understand, what do I need to do? It's going to take a lot of work. It's like going to the gym takes a lot of work. You have to just get your butt up. But once you get it up, you have to keep going. But it's the getting your butt up off the couch that's the hardest step, right?
Can I pause
And so the
you?
same thing. Yeah, yeah,
There's
yeah.
some, there's something I know. I like to pause you because you have there's so much, and I feel like we're going to have these threads that we can come back to. I also want to just illuminate your care as a practitioner. Something that you have offered me what is an invitation to be compassionate and caring with myself on this path, on in this practice, right? Because your care is a relational practice. When you write my prescriptions and you send them to me, right? um you know I continue to go back. I do read them, just by the way. I know that sometimes, like, I don't think I would imagine it would be like, I don't know if she's reading this, but I do. And one time I went back and I was going back to look up my herbs, and
Mm.
and I saw where you had clearly typed, um be kind to yourself,
Ah,
um right? And that was a prescription, and that is a prescription that I take very seriously, that has required an extensive self-compassion practice, and that actually is medicine, because I cannot have the insight, right, to do the and not interrogation, but it is an interoceptive practice, right? The looking inside in my inner experience to understand what is um what is the need here at the root, right?
mhm,
When I want to um leave a state of consciousness, or if I want to elevate my state of consciousness,
mhm,
right? If I'm seeking, and to your point, right, I'm not condemning drugs or in any way. What I know is that the patterns that we're talking about, right?
mhm.
Being conscious of the patterns where we are looking to leave our bodies, to
Yeah,
dissociate, numb. The ability for me to slow down and to pause and to notice um w- the urge, I need a drink,
yeah.
or I need to go and get a tincture, or I want to set my day up, right? For me, right, I have a medical marijuana permit, right? I have the right, prescribed by my psychiatrist. I love her.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
right, she's awesome. And also it was a part of my, my regimen.
mhm,
And when it became it, right, if I'm microdosing, I'm taking simple small amounts of CBD or a combination, right, for specific symptoms, I'm still not addressing the root. And um there was a point, like I said, when I said I was high for a year and a half, I'm talking about from 2020, and it was probably more than a year and a half. I think from
mhm,
2020 to 2022, um I feel like I can't remember, it's too many days when I did not have some form of marijuana, some form of cannabis in my body. And I want to say that that's not the problem.
mhm.
The
Yeah,
issue was when it was, this is something that has to happen every day. Like
yeah.
like the urge in my body was, I can't get through this day, this experience, without this. And when it was elevated to the point where I'm not medicate, right? Like I'm not taking care of myself. Now I'm high. I've left this space. Now, for some time, I needed to leave the space because, to your point, things had shifted and my body was not able to respond. And so but there wasn't conscious choice.
Yeah.
And so I think that's when there's the difference is there conscious choice, conscious awareness, and the shame that my body carries around addiction,
Hmm.
right? Not just societal shame, but within a family where both of my parents had parents who were alcoholics
Hmm.
and who were who where they had really troubled relationships with those parents
Hmm.
because of their addiction. That and that was rooted in deep trauma,
Right.
but that they were children, right? And so because of that, that comes into the my parenting, and the message was always do not become them.
Yeah.
Like, are you drinking too much?
Yeah.
And so there was a hypervigilance that came from my parents where I didn't know how to have a healthy relationship with the things that took me out of my body.
Yeah. Well, and that all that for you to say goes back to the simplicity of how do I digest this present moment? Do I have the tools and the mental faculties and cognitive abilities to digest this experience, right? If I do not, then what do I know in the world to be that medicine that's going to be the self-medicating component, right? I remember a teacher of mine a long time ago said, people that smoke, when they're the act of smoking, because then he created what's called the smoking meditation, which helps to stop smoking because it draws awareness to like the whole process of smoking, from buying the pack to opening the pack to smelling the pack to taking the cigarette out to smelling the cigarette to looking at the fire, lighting the cigarette to taking that first inhale, noticing how the inhale touches the breath. He's like, this is all a means of trying to connect back to the heart. Because when you're smoking, smoke goes to the heart. And so you're trying to create that medicine. So self-medication can happen on many levels. For some, it might be, I'm going to the gym, right? Because they learned a different way of processing the world and their world by doing the gym. Is there a gym addiction? There are some gym addictions. It's very interesting when I see people that are like, I have to go to the gym twice a day, three times, 6 times a week, and I have to do it at nighttime. No, no, there's something else happening here, and that actually is not good. So excess exercise is not good, and lack of exercise is not good. There's a middle ground. And well, similarly, when we go to a buffet, if you eat food really fast, if you get into the momentum of eating food a lot and fast, first of all, Ayurveda looks at buffets as not an ideal place to eat because combinations, portions, timing, because you're eating over an hour where you should be done eating a meal within 15, 20 minutes max. So all that is just not proper eating um, behaviors or rituals. But that's a different note. And
I'm a
so
hard food snob. I also don't care for buffets.
yeah, because that causes overeating very easily. And so when you have the momentum of eating too fast and you get indigestion, you feel sick and nauseous, and you don't get to notice the cue of the stomach going, I think I'm full, I think I'm full, I think I'm full. When you take pause, and I'm using this analogy as the buffet, as like how we experience and digest the world when we're overeating, 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 overeating. At a certain point, there's going to be a maximum threshold that's crossed, and the body will produce a symptom at that point. Um, so if you take that pause from whatever's happening in the world that could be stressful, the ease that comes with that, and we see that when people go to like the woods or camping or something like that, and they disconnect from the digital technologies and all these things, the body resets itself. That's been inherent since the beginning of first, human, that that pause and that connection to nature brings us back to ourselves so we can digest what's happening in the world. So taking space is essential. Some people take space by going to the gym. Some people take space by going on silent retreats. Some people just take space on like a Saturday, just staying home, being quiet and listening to classical music. Like how do we create that capacity and space for space to digest what's happening so that the body can process? Because then what happens is that the doshas, which can be forces of health and wealth and longevity and well-being, can very quickly, with the wrong things, turn into forces of death. you know, and I'm going to tie into this quote that I wanted to mention before. I'm going to read it in Sanskrit and then, just kind of like translate it. Let's pull it up. Shantagnal Briyate Yukte Chiram Jivatyanamayaha Rogi Syad Vikrite Mulam Agnistam Mana Richate. When the Agni stops functioning, the individual dies. If the
Mm,
Agni functions normally, the individual can lead a healthy and long life. Similarly, if the Agni becomes abnormal, the individual suffers from various diseases, and hence, Agni, which is digestion, is said to be the root cause of health and longevity. And so this is something that's been written in one of the classical texts called Charaka, and it's in his, particular chapter called Chikitsastan, talking about management of digestion and metabolism and diseases that come from that. And so the inability to digest experiences, food, sensory experiences, affects the doshas, which is a physiological, physical process, physical being physics, right? And when the doshas are accumulating a certain momentum, at the junctions of each seasonal transition, we do certain cleansing practices called shodhana, purification, cleansing, detoxification, to reduce the pressure of the doshas so that we can continue to digest the previous experience, which was the last season, to get ready for the next season. When we don't do these proper seasonal cleansing, and these are important pieces, then the doshas will continue to gain a certain momentum. And when they get this momentum, they start to infiltrate other aspects of the body, different channels and arteries. And so when these channels, it's like imagine the main street of a city, Broad Street in Philly, Broadway in New York City, 95 from here to New York. If there's an accident, um, what happens? Then traffic increases, and then the side streets begin to swell and get inundated and slow down. And if this traffic is, um, catastrophic, then that area is no use, right? But the energy gets redirected somewhere else, so the neighboring regions have to bear the weight of whatever that change in physics has occurred. And so we have to understand that the body is the same way. When digestive system from mouth or rectum is not properly functioning, which depends on consistency of a dietary regimen, consistency of a sleep regimen, consistency of an exercise regimen, then of course the momentum will get faster, and the liver will get affected, the spleen will get affected, joints get affected, mind gets affected. Because if you're trapped in a house and the house is on fire, you're going to, start screaming and flailing, right? And so the body is going to produce this, and the mind's going to be affected by this. And similarly, if the mind is affected by certain stresses, the body suffers the consequence, right? If I'm stressed and I can't process the stress, and I keep drinking or smoking pot, but then I'm wondering why I'm having lung issues, respiratory issues, allergy issues, sleep issues, joint issues, constipation. If I'm drinking too much, my liver is affected and I'm swelling and acne and rashes. Of course, this is the karnakarya, which is the cause and effect. And so we have to clear the pathways, open up the channels that creates space for the buddhi, the inner intelligence that exists in the cellular level of each cell in our DNA and beyond, so that we can have the ability to digest experiences. So the body is going to be the medium that has less infliction,
mm,
right? And so it's a very intricate process. And so working within the paradigm of Ayurveda, it's like you have a ball of yarn, but along the yarn strand, there's multiple knots, and you have to kind of undo the knots. And sometimes you can undo the knots when you get to the center of it. In a human being, it's about getting to the center of your consciousness. And how do you unravel that process? And so we are born into this world as this role known as Erin and Antonio and all these things and Maya. We're born into this world, and these are names that we go by as a label in this consciousness, in this body of the manifestation of the elements. And coming with that is the karmic ties of like ancestral roots and environment and things like that. And it's a simultaneous experience. We are all of it, right? We are sons and daughters and cousins and uncles and moms and dads and brothers and all these things. And we are all so none of it. And when
mm,
we can remember that yes, we're playing a role as a character, like William Shakespeare says, um, world's a play, and we merely play it, right? And we are understanding like, oh, I'm Antonio, I'm all these roles, and I'm also not all these roles, right? And so how do I find my autonomy amidst this? And from interactions with people that are feeling this imposed cultural obligation that creates an entrapment, that's also a mental perception. Because there
Mm,
might be some truth that yes, you might have to take care of your mom to some capacity. And there's also a point where like how much of that obligation is really a hook in your back that inhibits your fullest capacity as who you are in this world. And that's an individualized question that has to be explored for each person.
yes.
And I'm not saying or proposing that it's easy, right? But it is a journey worth reflecting on. And these are the things people need to look at if they really want to understand what's happening in your world. You know,
Mm,
I have some patients that come in sort of like a tornado, like Tasmanian devil from, Warner Brothers. And they're like wondering why their life is spinning so much. And I observe certain patterns where certain people have my mom just got sick. I just got into a car accident. I just hurt my foot. I just with all, and I'm like, wow, this is an interesting experience. Like, what are you doing in choices that contribute towards this? Like, these are things that we look at to see, huh, how am I showing up to this? How am I perceiving this? How am I contributing towards this? Right. And a lot of people would rather just go hit the bottle, right? There's a difference between, oh my God, I had such a stressful week. I just want a couple glasses of wine. If you're in a normal, healthy state where you're like, I don't need that glass of wine, I can actually sit and diffuse the bomb and understand how to calm myself down without having to do something external. That's great. That takes a lot of work, right? It's not always easy. And then it
yes.
depends on the level of stress and how much stress there is, the volume, and how long. Versus like every time I'm stressed, I go hit the bottle, right?
Hmm.
Versus wow, it was a lovely week. Just sitting with some friends now, having a nice dinner, and I'll have a glass of wine, right? That's a different energy to it.
Hmm. Yes.
It's like, yeah, I'll have a glass because it's in the moment, and this is how it's just going to be part of the moment. Just like, I'm just going to take a walk right now because I feel like I need to take a walk. Like there's a way that the mind can be um, cultivated when you get to that place so that you know how to like prevent things from accumulating so much that now you're inundated, now your system's shutting down, you're overeating, you're getting sick, why you have this condition, why you have that issue, and taking a pause and slowing down. If it's not done through conscious awareness, it gets done through unconscious awareness, which is getting sick.
Getting
And those moments of getting sick, you know, in a lot of cases, getting to that moment of sickness has been a choice all along. It's like, oh, I know I'm feeling that little tickle in my throat and a dryness in my sinus. I have no time because I have that deadline. I have to stay up late to do this paper. Da, 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 da. Um, but then I wonder why I'm having bleeding diarrhea next week. Whereas, oh, I should probably just take today and rest as much as I can appropriately and then continue so that I can sort of help the body regain homeostasis enough to avoid that. And this takes a lot of work. And
it's a yes, yes.
we're
It's
not
a
taught
lot of
that in schools. We're not taught that in a lot of
no.
schools. And like, how do you manage stress? Just like Western doctors have a minimal amount of hours that are taught to them about actual dietary importance and nutrition, right? It's just a basic component of like caloric intake, proteins, carbs, fats, right? And Ayurveda, you know, we don't look at it from that perspective. It's just like, and people that do calorie counting and use apps to like determine how much calories are in that meal, that no, this is not proper. Like maybe it's great because it increases a certain awareness of becoming aware of food. Yes, that's great. One step in the right direction for sure. And all small steps count because small steps can lead to big steps, right? Like little kids.
Yes, yes.
Eventually you start running like adults. But anyways, you start running towards life or away from life at that point. But anyways, So it's like the small little steps, but then it's like, don't get stuck there because it's much more than that. You know, nutritionists, dietitians, and things like that all go to Ayurvedic physicians, or most likely will have the tendency to go to Ayurvedic physicians. Ayurvedic physicians will never go to a dietitian nutritionist because we have an inherent system, thousands of years old, completely like researched and understood, very rooted, that creates this overarching capacity to understand what is nutrition for the person based on constitution, where they're at in life, where they're at in their mind, where they happen to be in the present moment, right? It's much more than just like, did you get your 40 grams of salmon today with the scoop of brown rice mixed with the asparagus dipped in coconut oil. Like it's much more than that, right? It's the
Yes.
alchemy. So what are we putting into our systems? What are we digesting? Because if we're putting inappropriate things, we're putting junk food, which is watching news all the time. And, in Ayurveda, we want to be aware of the world stuff. We don't want to be inundated by it. And also there's, one of my teachers had said, secondhand knowledge is firsthand gossip. Right. So if
Yes.
I'm watching the news and I'm not there, I'm not getting the full truth. So I have to know that when I'm watching something, that there is a piece of truth missing. Even if it's video recorded, it's still based
Correct.
on the lens of the person that's recording.
Right.
Because what they might be focused on, what's happening to the side. And Marianne Williamson, when I read in my 20s, a series of her books, and one of them was called The Healing of America, she's like, let's dissect the newspaper. She's like, what's posted on the first page, right, are the failures of the world. What's
Hmm.
posted on the last page, the successes, right? That's the sports page, which is a whole different rant I will go on when I will avoid because I might lose people here because
Yep.
it's,
Yep. We'll
but,
be
and
together.
then something in between, maybe. But she's like, and she's like, you have to wonder that if they're focused on this in the news, what are they not focused on? What are they not showing you?
That part.
Yes.
I have to do this for a second.
Yeah, I love that book. I
Uh,
read that when I was 23.
well, I'm about to be 43 and I've been reading it, but
Did
I'm
you
great.
just get it?
Yeah, I got it from, no, I've had it for about almost a year.
Uh-uh.
But yeah, like 42 years old.
Yeah, I was 23 and I first started reading. And so actually what prompted it was my boyfriend at the time. He was given a gift of this like daily calendar, daily message thing from uh Dr. Scott Peck, A Road Less Traveled, because he wrote a series of 3 books. And so, it was very cute to read each day, like January 1st, well, because his first line of the book, it says, um, life is difficult. And when you understand and accept this, it becomes a little less difficult. And so it's like, and that was the first thing. And it's like, oh, and so then I started reading that. I went from reading Dr. Scott Peck to um, Martin Luther King to reading Marianne Williamson to reading some of Gandhi's books.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like I was 23, something was calling me, right?
Yes, that was,
And I was
yes,
still crazy 23-year-old going through crazy stuff, but life has had its own underlying current pulling me in this direction of where I'm at now, where I continue to follow. And this trajectory of understanding the world from a holistic perspective and understanding, science and understanding its application and understanding like so many different angles to help people essentially. And so like how do we come back to like digesting. We all have to digest our own experiences. What tools do we need to put in place so that we can have a better digestive process,
yes,
mentally and physically, right? Because I incorporate yoga and I incorporate meditation and you know dietary plans and eating properly and seasonal cleansing. Like, of course, there's some moments I kick and scream where I'm like, I don't want to do this. And sometimes I could psych myself out, but that's why like doctors make the worst patients and we shouldn't treat ourselves all the time. So I have my mentor, that's my Ayurvedic physician that is sort of like holding me accountable. Right? So we need some of that because we can all get distracted by life stuff and we have to keep going. And so as we keep coming back to ourselves, which is our own inner state, we can see what role we play in our world of like what role of like son, mom, uncle, cousin, right? So as I'm digesting myself and being authentic to myself and doing the things that I need to do to take care of myself, maybe part of self-care is taking care of mom or whoever and knowing like how to like slow down to the moment and see like, is this exceeding my capacity? Or am
Yeah,
I
right.
inundated by a cultural implied imposed obligation that might actually be affecting me on a deeper level? And then I attended a talk many years ago by Arun Gandhi, which is Mahatma Gandhi's grandson. And he said, and it was great, like the lineage, I could feel the potency of the lineage. It was very amazing. And he said, passive passive violence become active violence. And he
Mhm.
said passive violence includes, and it's not just exclusive, it's like physical needs not being met, medical needs not being met, educational needs not being met, basic needs of affection and like a roof over your head not being met. When those pieces are neglected, there's a violence there. And that's what leads people to thinking, I don't have this. That person has that. I will take from them. Right.
Mm,
And then when it's a, like a natural need, and we can almost parallel it to the urges, um, Adaranya Vegas, the Adaranya Vegas, if I'm suppressing this urge, it's going to come out a different way, right? And then it becomes aggressive. And now I have this condition because I was withholding my urge of speaking, withholding my urge of pooping, that now I'm having cramps and now my intestines have cancer and all these things, and my bloodstream, lymphatic system is inundated, and my mind is depressed because the chemicals going through my bloodstream that circulate and go through the circulatory system and respiratory system, my mind is sort of struggling and becomes anxious and depressed and all these things. Of course, so when we lighten the load of the body by supporting proper digestion of all this, the mind has less to deal with,
yes.
right? And similarly, when in yoga, there's an alchemy of Ashtanga yoga, which is like the eightfold process of yoga. And a lot of people don't know this. They think Ashtanga yoga is a style of yoga. It is a style of yoga, but true Ashtanga yoga is about understanding the eightfold process. And yoga is like the third step in that process. But preceding meditation, which is dhyana, which is seventh step, the other six steps have to be put in place for proper meditation to happen. It's a cooking process. You can't just go from, buying noodles, and I'm going to use Italian resources or references as an example. You can't just have a lasagna. You just can't open a stove and see a lasagna. You have to go to a store and you have to get you know, the tomatoes, you have to get the basil, you have to get the noodles or make the pasta yourself. Um, and then you put it all together. And so then you get the final like putting in the cooking and dhyana meditation, seventh step of Ashtanga. Ashtanga means like eight limbs. So eight limbs, seventh limb is dhyana. Eighth limb is samadhi, which is pure expansion of consciousness, enlightenment, what people call. Um, you finally get the cooking process in the oven to happen with the lasagna, and then you wait 45 minutes at 425, 450 degrees, you get the lasagna, right? The samadhi is the lasagna. And so understanding you can't just jump to the lasagna. And so you can't just go into like that, for the most part for most people. And it's an alchemical process that you have to kind of build up to, but you can't really skip or fast forward through the steps as much as you'd like to. And again, here's the fast pill that people want. It's a process, and everyone has to be taught how to do this. And a lot of people are not taught how to like cultivate this at a young age. So like, how do you deal with stress? How do you manage? How do you like address and honor the emotions? And how are we like giving way and space for the urges to happen? You know, um, we didn't get to talk about the Adharanya Vegas, which is like the urges not to be, um, the urges to be suppressed. And so I will read
Mm.
what's called the
Oh, yeah.
shloka. Um, let's see. Lobha shokha sorry. Lobha shokha bhya krodha krodmana vegam vidharayat Naryalit yeshyatir gana vidya yasha buddhimahan buddhiman. An intelligent person should control greed, grief, fear, anger, egoism, shamelessness, impudence, jealousy, and excessive affliction in anything, and any desire to acquire someone else's wealth. And then he goes on to say, like, harsh talks, excessive talking, that which intends to harm others, or backbiting, lying, and untimely speech, improper words at an improper time are to be restrained during speaking. And then, like, we think about these things, we're like greed, grief, anger, egoism, shame, like these are things that we should withhold.
Mhm.
But that puts us in a state of having to be aware of those things to begin with, right? And we're all in like this learning process, and we have training wheels on, and we're like, oh, I said something mean, and someone reflects to you, you said something mean, you evaluate how mean it was, why was it mean, you get to the root, you digest what happened at that root that created this sort of passive aggressive, or what I've been learning about, reading about recently, is like microaggression, and so microaggressiveness can trigger people that have unprocessed things on a more subtle level by getting into that little crevice, right?
Mhm.
And it's a learning curve, it's a learning opportunity. That trigger is always the doorway to something much bigger and grandiose. And it's amazing if people can slow down and pause for a second versus think, it's your fault, Erin, you made me upset. You don't make me anything. You don't have that much control because my mind determines that. So if you affected me in some way and I take it personal, then I didn't digest the experience properly, and I projected back to you that's your fault. But I already had this raw nerve exposed that just the wind can come and touch it, of course. But I'm responsible for coding that nerve.
Can we pause here? And then I think if we can,
We
I
have to
want
wrap up.
to, right, we have to wrap up, and that's a big one, right? And then I would love to just like do a little 5 minute brief debrief with you.
Yeah.
So the thing that was like really like, so when you talk about so specifically, I think around microaggressions, right? For years as a racial equity and change facilitator, and someone who teaches and trains on racial justice and systemic oppression. Um, the idea of teaching organizations about microaggressions was um, a symptomatic response. And so when I think about all of the um the trainings and workshops that I would do with organizations around understanding microaggressions and the impact, right? That was it was a symptomatic, not systemic understanding, right? And so as you were describing, right, like we would talk about microaggressions as like the a death of 1,000 cuts,
Hmm.
right? And the way that you just described it, I think was really powerful for me. There was a part of me, I'm going to say this, right? There was a part of me that wanted to react and say, "Oh wait, but you're missing the larger structural and systemic understanding of the bodies that have always experienced the unbelonging, so that when those triggers do come, it is valid and validated." Right? That part wants to jump up. And at the same time, there was another part of me that was like, oh, and also there's something here. But the soul self, right, could allow me to pause and slow down. And so I want to reflect back, like all of the
Hmm.
wisdom just in that exchange, in what I noticed in my body, and then also what you were sharing about the ability to slow down, right? The
Hmm.
speed at which we are moving and that our nervous systems are reacting and responding, especially in contexts and environments that where our bodies already feel unsafe,
Hmm. Hmm.
that when we are coming with the experiences of chronic unsafety,
Hmm.
structural unsafety, right, in a body that is consistently navigating whether or not I am worthy to be,
Hmm.
period, worthy to be.
Yeah.
um, that any message that would come at me and feel like, and I would experience it as um, a message that triggers my internalized unworthiness, that my reaction to that and addressing that interaction alone in in a vacuum is incomplete. But the understanding of, wait a second, the larger structural elements of this is also contains speed and our relationship to time and our relationship to self, the true self. That when I'm embodied and connected to the true self, I can slow time down. I
Yeah.
can pause and notice, do I receive this? Right. And so I wanted to reflect back this like aha, this
Yeah.
excitement about the expansion of possibility for the bodies that are consistently um, receiving messages, triggers of
Mhm.
unbelong, right? The internalized unbelonging
Yeah.
and the structural it's like the reification, right, of the unbelonging, and that there is the possibility for choice. Do I accept this? Do I consume it?
Yeah.
How do I want to relate to this experience? First, can I slow time down?
Yeah.
And I just want to offer you gratitude, um, right, for being in this generative, um, beyond conversation. And I'm also just deeply grateful for our ability to flow emergently.
Yeah.
Uh, because there's so much medicine in here,
Yeah.
um, and that we have so much more that we can create, and more possibility that we can create. And
Mhm.
I feel like that's also an invitation for more relationship, right?
Mhm.
For more conscious relationship, and that can ripple out into the universe as well around what's possible, what can be generative,
Yeah.
outside of the projections,
Yeah.
right, of what is not on us. And that I am grateful to Ayurveda. I'm grateful to you. Um, and
Thank you.
yeah, so I wanted to just bring that because I'm like, oh, we get to come home to self
Yeah.
and make this an incredible connection. Um, and that I want to go deeper and
Yeah.
farther
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
um
On
uh,
wrapping it up,
no, I was just
wrapping.
gonna say, Dr. Antonio, can you tell folks though also like how folks can find you again? I'm going to clearly
Yeah.
share
Yeah.
your information, but I
Well,
also want to lift up anything that you have going on, maybe this season or this
yeah.
month that you want to share as well.
Yeah. I mean, just to wrap up your last point. So definitely, it's not about excluding that. We understand that there's certain structures in place in the world that don't necessarily make it easy for people. And there's a lot of things that have been, existing over a long period of time. So it's not to ignore or neglect that. And it's also understanding, like, just like you play a role, like William Shakespeare said, the world is a stage and people merely play it. It's like, what role do you play? It's like, how do you develop the relationship with yourself to know who you really are amidst this role that you're playing, or the roles that you play in the world that's around you in your own ecosystem, going not just like family and cousins and neighbors and all these things, to the bigger picture of like whether social injustice and like racial injustice and economic, and like, yes, all that's part of the play, right? And if you can come back to yourself, you can see how you can show up. And again, it's honoring what comes up for you, because if it's an urge or a vega that's coming up for you, it's important to kind of evaluate and have this inner process to sit with and learn that. And when we look at the masters, Moses, he had his doubts, right? And he went into the desert for 40 days, right? And tried to figure out his confusion of what he's supposed to be doing as a God messenger, right? We have Jesus, who struggled with the devil, went into the 40 days of like meditation and reflection and struggling and confusion and all these things, and then being you know understood as having been crucified and dealing with the last minutes of his human struggling ego peace and full surrender, right? And
Mm.
then Buddha,
Come on
who
now.
was confused and taunted by the demons, Ravana or whoever the demon was, I can't remember, um, that he didn't understand like what was actually happening in the world, which is an awakening process for him. He didn't just come into awakening, right? He had all of them, all the three teachers, had to go into like understanding and seeing and then transcending. They played certain roles and then they transcended and came back from this wisdom. The rishis who taught, Ayurveda, who brought Ayurveda, they weren't just like, beings just sitting in a circle of meditation. And I mean, they were also scientists, but they were understanding the world and transcended the world to understand the world from a bigger picture so they can come back and give this wisdom and teach others to help find their way out, just like Dante's cave, right? The analysis of Dante's cave, where the person escaped, saw the light, came back, tried to describe the light to the people in the cave, and they were not believing him, you know. And it's like we can all have the capacity for willing to just surrender a little bit. And as far as finding me in my cave in Philadelphia, in Dr. A's cave, you can find me at stillpointayurveda.com and then email me anything as far as coming up. It's deep winter. Spring comes, we'll be getting ready to do really deep, profound, lengthy cleanses and panchakarma and things like that to really support the body and opening up and reestablishing itself through digestion and immunity and all these things. And that's the main thing that I have going on right now. There's no upcoming classes or workshops, just individualized work, and then these podcasts and um, just little old me hanging out here and awaiting everybody because I'm always open to new patients and I love the adventure and journey that each person brings as they walk in the door and exploring. And I am always enthusiastic and look forward to it. And here I am.
Yes, here you are. And like I said, I'm grateful that here you are and here we be. Here we be together. And I look forward to our next expansive conversation. We're going to continue to explore the wisdom of Ayurveda, the wisdom of Dr. Antonio Aragona, and the wisdom of our relationships with digestion, transformation being the same, and change
Yeah.
for our bodies in relationship to these systems and in right relationship with the earth and spirit. I thank you and I look forward to our next conversation. Let's
Thank
stop,
you.
but we can stay. Okay, so now stop recording. Do, 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 do.